Hey, it's Eli, and today is September 4th, 2021, and I am here on the traditional lands of the Munsee Lenape people, Lenape Hokig, as I have said in other videos. Today I am leaving a log entry. If you look below, you're going to see the various hashtags for this. So that's documenting presence, disruptor mechanism, field protocol, speculative linguistic model, reorientation, language, neuroplasticity, habit, mimesis, perception, evolution, gender, pronouns, neo-pronouns, trans, non-binary, LGBTQIA, identity, feminism, place, disability, access, and education. When you see the stuff below, it's usually sort of me giving a matrix, right? It is a way in which we find information and tag information on the internet, but it's also a way for me to sort of codify the work that I do for later archiving and organization, right? So just so you understand that. So what I'm going to be talking about today, here's a little summary, right? And this is what it also is going to say in the description. So this is an offering about perception and language in particular, and how we might begin to make profound shifts to the ways that we see, perceive, and ultimately know through a few specific linguistic hacks, reorienting our relationship to gender, disability, and place in particular, no matter how we identify or where we live, right? And some thoughts, I'm going to give you some thoughts as well on how we can implement these strategies, not only as facilitators or educators, but regardless of our role in our daily lives and shared spaces. We're going to close with some thinking about what it means to envision a future beyond the collapse and end that we fear, how we can make alternatives feel concrete, tangible, and possible through the use of explicit tools and methods like these, and how we can move beyond freeze and despair. And I'm going to put my entire notes from this video in a Medium post, which I will link. You can always find the link to my Medium in my link tree, along with my website, SoundCloud, and all sorts of other things. All right. So in the wake of the Texas ruling, and after my first week of classes and sort of institutional meetings, I find myself thinking about a few seemingly disparate things and how they intersect in ways that can be incredibly productive for us at this time. So I hope that the breakdown and strategies that I offer here today can be useful for you. Drop me a line or a DM to let me know what you think and if you end up employing any of these ideas either in your daily life, your interactions, your classroom, or in other ways. Okay, so something I've been thinking about a lot these last few weeks is the use of gender identity pronouns and the ways that we use them, or we don't, in institutional settings like meetings and in the classroom, both online and off, specifically, but also in the world, right? Related to this, and I'll explain why it's related in a minute, is both the use of indigenous place names, right, land acknowledgements, as well as accessible elements such as visual descriptions. And then the thing that feels far off, but really isn't, is sort of, feminism and how this affects something like the ruling that just happened, but really encompasses the rights and lives of any human who is not a cisgendered male. So I'll say here first what I said to my students this week about the reason why I always introduce myself with my pronouns whenever I meet someone, and why I ask them to use them not only in introductions, but why they should make a habit of including the pronouns they use, not only in introductions in a class, but anywhere, but also why they should include them in their online screen name without prompting in a Zoom or other setting. And this is because establishing a need to ask for pronouns when you meet or see someone is about something far bigger than whomever might be trans or non-binary in the room. What's really happening is that we are causing a critical shift in one of the major ways we make an assumption that you can know things about another person simply by looking at them, which is more often than not wrong. This is important for cisgendered people too. When we include our pronouns, we say, I know I cannot make this assumption about others when I look at them, and therefore I know that you cannot make this assumption about me. And therefore, of course, we would need to share this information so that we can interact with mutual understanding. This is a huge, enormous win for every single person. Every single body's claim at their own autonomy, and the discomfort this causes is seismic because it both introduces the notion that each of us has the capacity to claim, name, and write the story of our own identity in ways we were told were unavailable to us, and it creates friction and refusal for those who wish to control or define the bodies and identities of others. The use and introduction of new language and repeating this enough to cause new neural pathways in the way we must anytime we establish new habits or patterns is something that I call the speculative linguistic model. In my set of what is also known as the disruptor mechanism protocol, which, as I mentioned before, is part of the larger how to human, tongue-in-cheek but also not, series of strategies for participating in our own evolutionary rewiring, both individually and collectively. When we introduce new language consistently enough around something we're interacting with, participating, or perceiving, we begin to establish a new pattern there, and eventually our relationship to that thing, idea, experience, or person changes. We've all seen this over the last year in a variety of ways as language like essential worker or social distancing made its way into our collective psyche and usage patterns. As anyone holding space, even interpersonally, but especially when we are hosting events or facilitating, etc., or we're an employer, a manager, a parent, or a leader, we are not only setting the tone, but defining the parameters within which another person or persons are meant to engage with us, with each other, and often the world. Sometimes this is a suggestion, sometimes we are teaching these ways of being as a way of sharing or passing on knowledge, and sometimes it comes in the form of an order or command. Sometimes it happens in the way we model behaviors and demonstrate by personally illustrating perhaps over and over ways of being, speaking, and engaging with language, things, and ideas. Classrooms, workshops, and other explicit learning spaces in particular are those in which the dynamic has been agreed upon, and the facilitator educator has been granted the role of knowledge bearer. So when we are in that role, what we model, whether or not we've considered it explicitly, has by default a didactic nature. Right now, we're dealing with a situation in which faculty are being forced into dubious ethical places and potential physical danger, carrying out the fiscally driven directives of institutions who are insisting upon in-person classes and other activities, sending, even as the Delta variant of COVID sends even the vaccinated to the hospital in droves. Faculty are being put in a particularly hard situation because those who are thinking about what their actions model for young people know that their participation in questionable situations shows students that these things are okay and that their position as a knowledge bearer makes their actions more significant than that of a peer. Let's return to pronouns, though, and bring in the use of indigenous place names as well as visual access descriptions and other markers. The implementation, repeat use, and ultimately modeling of these on a frequent basis as a space holder begins to assist others in the rewiring of their neural relationship to perception in ways that have profound implications. Here we have the opportunity to remind ourselves and others that we not only cannot make assumptions about what we see when talking about gender, but also how we learn and what others with different bodies and brains might be experiencing. When we get into the habit of using pronouns, not because we are trans or non-binary, but because there is another person who is not cisgender present, and when we get into the habit of using visual descriptions, whether or not there is someone visually impaired present, we are doing absolutely vital work in reorienting the way our brain and body and senses relate to the information we receive and the assumptions we have been conditioned to make about being in the world and being with others. The same goes for place names. When we make land acknowledgments, we trouble the collective forgetting around the history that produced the current maps we're using. It is not only an essential reminder of the indigenous peoples all over the world whose relationship to the lands we now call by other names predated their history, but it also insists that we remember that these names are invented, and the fact that we perceive these places like we perceive these others in this way is not natural, but rather the result of years of conditioning. It's not surprising, as I said before, that implementing these shifts gets so much pushback, or perhaps even the people who one would expect to champion them, like my colleagues, often still not using pronouns in meetings, nor with their students. We are exhausted by what capital seemingly inevitable machines require of us. And these places where our relationship to perception begins to change erodes the way in which we participate in ways that can be painful, alarming, and add even more difficulty to things that are already a challenge. For many of us, trauma around how we came to erase or ignore our own identities, trauma around ignored needs of the body, and trauma around the violent past of our countries, our ancestors, or even our families can come up in ways we often don't have the tools to address, and more immediately don't feel we have the time to address. Which means that many people give lip service to these things, perhaps even wanting quite genuinely to honor the identity and history of others to whom this more obviously appears to benefit. I'm just not going to answer my door. While not stopping to ask how all of us benefit from this troubling and the autonomy it offers and champions. It's scary to recognize our power and that of others. It's scary and disorienting to realize your identity belongs to you in ways you never knew it could, and perhaps a well of anger or sadness follows this admission. But when we look to the sorts of legislation making its way into the highest courts, from what's happening in Texas around abortion to the water protectors fighting the pipelines and being prosecuted for it, to bathroom bills, battles around accessibility, and the alarming failure of our system to support disabled people, we can think about the ways our institutionally conditioned nature can make seismic change if challenged, right? Ultimately it's about shifting our relationship to who controls knowledge and decentralizing those forms of control. It's the beginning of a larger series of reorientation about what it means to be human in relationship to ourselves, each other, and all living things on the planet. I hope this has been useful and maybe given you ways you can begin implementing these ideas in your own daily practice and in spaces you share with others. What does it mean to introduce yourself with pronouns every single time you travel? Even every single time you meet someone, or with your kids, or think about the place names where you live or where you travel. I, for one, have not given up. I think that there is a different future ahead, and the more that we can begin to envision it, to strategize and work through tangible, practical ways of beginning to shift like these, the less we might despair. I see a lot of despair, a lot of giving up in the face of so many crises that perhaps seem to herald an inevitable end. And I think that a lot of this has to do with the challenge of seeing and imagining alternatives. Let's make it concrete together. Let's make it feel more like a beginning than an end.